Back when I was a senior in high school, I had a weekend job pumping gas at a highway gas station here in New Jersey. I saw all kinds of crazy stuff in the year or so that I worked there, but honestly, most of the stuff just came across as funny nowadays. Like even some of the closer calls with crazy customers or the time that I got robbed, I wasn't really in any life-threatening danger. I know how to handle myself, and I know not to do anything but cooperate with someone desperate enough to stick a gun in my face. We're trained to give up the money, it's insured, but there's no putting my brains back in my skull if I decide to be a hero over $50 and change. I mean, come on, the guy was even more scared than I was, so now it's ended up being like a crazy but not so scary story that I have no problem telling at parties or on dates or whatever. But then there's this one thing that happened that I don't bring up so easily, and that only ever comes out when people want to know what's the worst thing I saw. Sometimes I'm not even in the mood to talk about it, because I know that it can't have been just some rare one-time thing that only ever happened to me. But other times I feel like I gotta warn people, so they'll recognize it and act on it like I did. That's another part of this I hate. I feel like it sounds as if though I'm trying to make myself out as some hero in this situation, but I can promise you, I don't feel that way at all. I feel like I did the bare minimum, but enough intro, I'll get to the story. One night, I was working the night shift when an Audi with South Carolina license plates pulled in at around 2 in the morning. Some guy got out, asking me to fill up his car while he went to the bathroom. He put a $20 bill into my shirt pocket, promising another 20 if I could get the tank filled up quickly. Naturally, I rushed to do as he said, and I noticed a middle school-age girl asleep in the back seat, covered up to her chin with a blanket. I didn't want to wake her and risk losing my tip, so I proceeded to fill the tank as fast as I could while still being careful, keeping an eye on her to ensure that she wasn't waking up. She remained asleep, and as I focused more on filling the tank, I suddenly got this chill through myself when I looked back up at her. She was staring at me with her eyes wide open. Before I could say anything, she mouthed 2 clear words through the glass to me. "Help me." There was a moment where I just stopped dead, hand on the gas pump no longer filling up, and then I heard his voice asking, "Hey, everything all right over there?" I had to think on my feet pretty quick. I told him that something was wrong with the pump and that I could head back inside to reset it so the gas would start pumping again. I went on about how it had been happening on and off all day, apologized for the inconvenience, and assured him that it would be working in just a second. I ran inside, pushed the silent alarm, and then walked back out to finish filling up his tank. He fell for the whole thing. And if I say so myself, I put on an Emmy-winning performance and not completely freaking out and either strangling him or making some misguided attempt to actually rescue the girl. The cops later told me that I did the right thing. I had his plate number on the cameras, I got a good look at him and the girl, and his fingerprints were on the cash that he gave me. I made sure to call 911 as soon as they left, but thanks to the silent alarm, a patrol unit was already on the way to me. The dispatcher redirected the cop to the road the guy pulled off onto, and bingo, he was pulled over on a traffic stop. Supposedly all ended well for that particular girl, but how many others don't get a chance to signal for help like that? How many end up in the trunk instead of the back seat? How many don't get rescued? It's those kind of questions that I try not to think about, which is why I don't like telling this story too much. However, I feel it's important to share it sometimes as a warning. If this reaches as many people as possible, maybe it'll save me a whole lot of breath and a whole lot of sleepless nights. I need to preface this by saying that I don't believe in ghosts or any other kind of paranormal activity, and this is not an attempt to convince people of their existence. But what I will say is that I have an open mind regarding things that I can't explain using logic and reasoning. I know something happened to me, I just don't know what, and nothing I've heard so far has come anywhere near a satisfactory explanation. But then, that's what had me creeped out about it. If I could just chalk it up to seeing a ghost or witnessing a glitch in the Matrix, as I've heard people call it, or any of that crap, at least I get to draw a line under it and move on. But I can't, because I have no idea what happened that night, and neither does anyone else. I used to work for a security company that contracted overnight work for large office buildings in downtown Houston. Some of the buildings were real nice places, and their security offices had all kinds of amenities that others just didn't. The only problem was, they made for some of the most boring overnight shifts you could possibly imagine. Tough guards can be exhausting and dangerous, but boredom is a different kind of poison altogether. So you understand when I say out of all the places I expected my scariest guard might be, those places didn't get anywhere near the top 10. So, one of the buildings we worked in had a bunch of different offices on each floor, with the layout of each floor being shaped like a letter U. Each of the floors was owned by a different company, for the most part anyway, so most had a different design but the same layout, and part of that layout were those polished metal plates that sat on the corner of each corridor. They were positioned at the 90-degree angles in the U shape, and at first I figured it was just an odd design choice, but then I figured out that they were like mirrors. If someone was walking down the connecting corridor and you couldn't see them, you'd be able to see a little movement in the polished metal so you wouldn't run into anyone or get a fright. Kinda clever, right? Well, listen to this. One night, I'm working the overnight shift with 2 other coworkers when it comes my turn to perform a physical sweep of the building. We had most of the building mapped out with cameras, but no security guard worth his salt relies on electronics, so every half hour, one of the guards would take a quick walk around each of the floors just to make sure everything was A-okay. Most of the guys would just take elevators up and down, but it was around this time that I decided to take the stairs a few times a night as to try to get some exercise in. I was a few pounds heavier than I wanted to be, and walking up even 5 or 6 flights of stairs sucked. So I'd take as many flights as I could, then take the elevator the rest of the way. It also helped kill time on those hellish shifts too, so it was all gains in my mind. Anyway, this one night I managed it all the way up to the 9th floor, which was totally this new record for me, but I'm completely out of gas. I literally have to lean up against the wall to catch my breath, making sure to stay in the stairwell's blind spot so my coworkers don't watch and laugh at me. And then once I had myself together again, I walked out into the corridor and towards the first bend in that U that I mentioned earlier. As I get within a few feet of it, I freeze, because for the first time in the whole time that I'd worked there, I see a reflection in the polished metal mirror thing. It's not crystal clear, but it's 100% in the way that you always notice something different about something you've looked at 100 times before. But I can clearly see someone standing in the connecting hallway, wearing what looked to be the same kind of security uniform as me. I called out, thinking it was one of my coworkers, then the white-shirted shape suddenly moved out of sight. Now right away I'm thinking, this is a prank. I just caught them trying to jump scare me. So as I'm walking around the corners, I'm kinda calling out, "Hey, I know you're there, idiot. I saw you on the reflection." I get around each corner and I don't see anyone, so I assume the guy had ducked into one of the conference rooms or offices as a backup. I checked each and every one, and they were all empty. I called down on my radio to make sure someone really is up there with me, and they're just hiding in a closet or something because they're just a bunch of immature idiots. And the second I heard both guys talking on the same radio, I felt myself getting just a little bit freaked out. Either I was having some kind of weird episode after power walking up those 9 flights, or my eyes were playing tricks on me, and either one wasn't a desirable outcome, so naturally, I'm starting to get a little worried. Not majorly worried, just a little. I decide to take the elevator the rest of the way, still kind of concerned about my health and stuff, but then as I'm walking back towards it, something happened that makes me feel cold just to think about today. It felt like someone walked up behind me, like really quickly too. I heard the footsteps outside my own, and I felt that feeling of imminent danger you get when someone rushes you from behind. So I turned, had my hand on my sidearm ready to defend myself, but there was nothing. Just an empty corridor with only me standing in it. I can't even really think of the words for the kind of fear that I was feeling in that moment. The best that I can come up with is it was like a physical force. That fear hit me, and it pushed me towards the elevator at a speed walk. I was convinced that someone was up there with me, but at the same time, they either had to be psychic or a ninja to be able to rush up on me like that, or at least make me feel like I was being creeped on. None of it made any sense, and more I'm thinking that there's something wrong with me and not that something weird is going on. Once I was safely in the elevator, I called down to my coworkers and asked them to watch all of the cameras on the 10th floor for any kind of movement. They replied asking if I was all good or if I needed help, probably because they could hear the kind of state that I was in. But I told them to shut up, watch the cameras, and tell me if they could see anything or anyone. I was expecting a no, in which case I'd have to accept that I was having some kind of medical emergency and maybe even call 911. I heard about people having strokes or heart attacks and how they can feel confused or panicked or something, so that's all my hypochondriac mind was thinking of. But then, as my radio crackled to life again, I heard the next thing they said, and I swear to Christ that I felt like I was going to throw up. My coworker came back with, Yeah, there's someone up there with you. We're headed for the elevator right now." I sent it down to the ground floor, and if I'm being honest, I was weirdly relieved. I wasn't about to have a stroke, and I wasn't going crazy. There really was someone up on the 10th floor, and they were about to get one heck of a butt kicking for scaring the Jesus out of me. We swept all the rooms together, calling out to this potential intruder the whole time, saying things like, "Come on out," and "You only get trespassing," and even saying things like, "This is a heck of a way to get yourself shot." We were just bluffing, and it wasn't a huge issue that we didn't find this intruder on the 10th floor because they could have easily used the stairwell to escape to another floor. But instead of going and hunting them down, we just head back down to the security office and watch the cameras and just wait for the real cops to show up. On the way back down to the office, I asked my coworker what exactly he'd seen on those security cameras, and it turns out he hadn't seen anything definitive, just enough blurry movement on the edges of a monitor to know that A, someone was definitely up there, and B, they seemed like they knew where the camera's blind spots were. This is what really sent alarm bells ringing for my coworkers, as stuff like that suggests someone has cased the place, i.e. done a little recon in the daytime, possibly disguised as a client or employee so they'd know where to go to get whatever they'd come for, as well as how to get there without being spotted straight away. A lot of people have asked me, how could this person have gotten into the building in the first place, and didn't that bother me at all? The question to that is yes, it did, but we're not training to waste time thinking how. We're trained to react to intruders as and when they occur and to focus on either locking them down for the cops or getting them out of the building without anyone getting hurt. You focus on the hows afterward. In the moment, you focus on the intruder. Anyway, we watch the cameras, call the cops, and try to work out where the hell this intruder could have gotten to while avoiding all the security cameras. We're staring at the cameras for maybe 15 to 20 minutes before the cops show up, and we don't see any movement. Then, when the cops show up, we help them sweep all the floors and offices to make sure no one's around. They were pretty thorough about it too, opening up closets and checking under desks, but still, we found no one. Even the cops said that it must have been spooky for whoever was up there alone, which to me sounded like the understatement of the century. But right then, when we were dealing with the situation, I was sure that it wasn't just me going nuts. The situation was resolving itself, so I was relatively calm again. When the cops left, we switched on the alarm systems from the floors 9 to 13, meaning if anyone entered those floors again, we'd be instantly alerted and a 911 call would automatically be issued. No alarms were triggered that night, so we figured the episode was pretty much over and done with. We'd have to talk with the head of security about it, and there was no doubt that he'd be very interested in how we let something like that happen. But no one expected to get fired or anything, so we finished the shift as close to normal as possible and then just went home in a sort of good mood. It was only in the weeks afterward that I realized how much the experience had affected me, and the longer I went on wondering about it, the worse the feeling got. Thinking I put it behind me turned out to be a major error of judgment on my part, or maybe I did box it off and then it just broke out again, I don't know. I thought about what could have made those pictures and noises, what could have given me that feeling like someone was rushing up behind me, and after thinking about it for long enough, I decided that I didn't want to work there anymore, and when I was told that I couldn't pick and choose which guards I was on, I was left with no choice but to seek employment elsewhere. I'm not scared to admit that I'm scared of whatever happened up there, and rather than go down some crazy rabbit hole trying to explain it, I thought it was better just to walk away and start again someplace else. It's never happened again, nor is anything like that, but you can bet your bottom dollar if it does. I'm moving on. Again. I worked for the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police for 8 years, and in that time, I only had to use my sidearm once. A lot of other Metro cops might tell you that's kind of miraculous and that I should consider myself lucky. I do, in a manner of speaking, but those same cops would also admit that my one shooting is worth 3 or 4 of theirs, on sheer circumstance alone. I was driving through North Vegas one night after getting a call to the 7-Eleven on East Owens Avenue. Then on my way back towards the Strip, I'm slowing down as I come up to some lights when I spot something weird on James Street to my right. There was a car parked on the sidewalk with all the lights inside the car switched on, and it looked like the driver was slumped over in a sort of unnatural position. I didn't have any other calls, so I figured I'd drive around the block and then roll past him real slow to see if he was okay. And lo and behold, there's a guy passed out in the driver's seat of his car. So after a quick look around the driver and passenger's side to check for weapons or narcotics, I knocked on his window a few times to wake him up. The guy looked to be maybe in his late 30s, Hispanic, with a closely cropped haircut and what looked like work gear on. And when I knocked on his window, he woke up startled. Now, the first words out of his mouth were, "Oh my God, officer, I'm so sorry. This is literally my house right here. I think I just nodded off for a little bit and parked here." I asked him where he'd come from, and he told me that he worked nights at a chemical plant over in Henderson. He'd spent all day doing something for his family, then had to work right after, so after running on almost 24 hours on no sleep, he must have passed out as soon as it was safe to close his eyes for a few minutes. Now normally, I'd have to perform a field sobriety check on this guy, but he genuinely did seem exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot and his speech was pretty groggy, but it was clearing up more and more by the second. He didn't smell like booze and his ID checked out, but there was still something that didn't sit right with me. When I asked him which chemical plant he worked for, he said Olin Chloralkali. But I had a cousin in the chemical industry and he worked on the same Henderson Industrial Park, only at a company called Borman. Borman was the only chemical company running night shifts at the time, so if he didn't work for Borman, he couldn't have been working as anything but an overnight security guard. But since he was dressed for a manufacturing line or some other kind of heavy work, there was no explanation as to why he'd be out so late. I ran his ID, and the guy's record consisted of nothing but a few late parking fines, but I figured just to be certain, I'd run a field sobriety test and maybe search his vehicle if I noticed anything during the testing. Now, worst case scenario, I'd minorly inconvenience this dude, and he'd probably understand my reasons for doing so given how chill he was being. But best case scenario, I'd find whatever was making my spidey senses tingle in this situation. I'd caught the guy in a lie, a small one, but whenever that happens, you gotta remind yourself that no one with innocent or wholesome intentions tells casual lies like that, especially not to cops. So I head back to the dude's car and ask if he'd mind undergoing a quick sobriety check. He responds by saying, "No, not at all, officer." But then there's a slightly awkward pause before he says, "You want me to do it now?" I nod and he just sort of looks back at me as if to say, "Really? I thought we were cool." I explain to him that as much as I appreciate how tired he is and how hard he's been working, I've been ordered to perform a check on him given the circumstances. I promised to make it as fast as possible so we could get him inside and into bed, but that I had to do, or risk making my sergeant angry, you see. And that was total BS, but I figured if he could give me a little, I could give him a little. But instead of getting out of the car, the guy's arm, which had been resting on the door where the rolled-down window was, disappeared behind the door where I couldn't see it. This is a big no-no when dealing with cops, especially during a traffic stop or any kind of vehicular-based interaction. You can call me a bootlicker, tell me your taxes pay my wages, or that you're going to get me fired, but as long as you keep your hands at 10 and 2, I'm usually chill. You start putting your hands in places I can't see them, and I start getting nervous. I take a quick step towards the guy, hand on my sidearm, and tell him very politely to keep his hands where I could see them. He throws them both up, saying, Okay, officer, chill out. But they start drooping down again the moment we start arguing about the sobriety test. I had to physically pin the guy's left arm to the door to keep him from reaching, but he kept telling me, It's okay, I don't have any weapons in the car, I'm just trying to unlock the door. I then told him to unlock the door with his other hand, and that's when he grabbed it. The guy had a gun tucked behind his back in the driver's seat, and I was so focused on what his left arm was reaching for, I considered that the whole time he was reaching down for leverage, so he pushed himself forward a little, grabbed the gun, and started shooting at me. One of his bullets hit my left arm, but my gun was in my right, so I dropped back out of his arc of fire and then just unloaded through the rear passenger window, putting bullets to the driver's seat and into the dude's center mass. My left arm refused to work on me, so I had to grab my radio with my right, still holding onto my gun in order to call in that I'd been hit. This put me at a huge disadvantage for a second or two, and if the dude had still been a threat, he could have taken me out with a few well-timed and well-placed shots, but thankfully, he was in no position to do that. After I called it in, I immediately trained my sidearm back on him and then instinctually started barking out commands. I was scared out of my mind, with no idea of what to do. I didn't want to shoot the guy again, but disarming or detaining him was out of the question thanks to the bullet that he put through my arm. I remember how I stopped barking commands at him for a second only to hear the guy start to weakly say something like, "Why'd you shoot me, man? I'm right outside my house." He said it like he hadn't been the one to open up on me first, like I'd just shot him for being asleep in his car. And that happens way more than you think, too. I once watched a woman flee a traffic stop, crash her car into a family SUV, try to stab the officer who pulled her out of her smoking wreck of a car, and then lie there in cuffs saying, "I didn't do nothing." I guess some people get real scared when they think they're going to go to jail, be it first-timers or serial offenders. Some folks can take it. They grow up in the prison system, I guess. It's like they're home away from home. But others, well, sometimes I think they choose death over giving up whatever they got going on. For example, the guy who blew my left bicep out, you'd think that he was some wanted cartel member with 100 warrants out for him. But no, he'd never been in trouble with the law before. He just couldn't face going without the oxys that he was hooked on. That's all my fellow officers found in his car. One bottle of oxys with no prescription. Now, with no priors and a good attorney, he could have gotten himself a suspended sentence in drug counseling and, at worst, maybe 6 months with good behavior. But then the thought of having to detox in jail, I guess some people really do think that that's a fate worse than death. I was just 19 when I first moved to the United States. My father died when I was still a baby, and my mom passed away from cancer just a few days before my 18th birthday. I stayed with my sister for a while, who was married with kids by that time, but it wasn't long before I started dreaming of a life away from Guatemala. I started my application not long after and pulled a few strings with an old friend of my father's to land a sponsor and a job up in Texas. Then, about 18 months later, I arrived in the city of Laredo. The U.S. was new and big and exciting, and although the work was hard and my pay wasn't great, I was happy. My abuela always used to say, "Al falta de pan, tortilla." When you don't have bread, you make do with tortillas, and that's exactly what I was doing. So I worked my crappy job and slept in a crappy shared apartment, having faith that things would improve over time. They did, but as per a favored saying of mine, it's always darkest before the dawn. And just when it seemed like things were going okay, there was a fire at the apartment building that I was staying in. We woke up to someone pounding on our door, and when we all ran outside, one half of the building was engulfed in flames. I think some people actually died that night. It was awful. So even though I was doomed to live in my car for the foreseeable future, it was kind of, by the grace of God go I kind of situation. So that was me, living in my car, pressing tortillas in this late-night cantina, saving every little penny that I could towards a plan that I hadn't even thought of yet. There were a lot of desperate people in Laredo around that time, and more of them turned to crime to help get ahead. I got more than one offer to get involved in something I really shouldn't have, and thankfully, God gave me the strength and the wisdom to stay on the straight and narrow. Some of the offers make me chuckle to think about these days. I just can't picture my skinny self slinging drugs or driving hookers around. I would have been eaten alive after 5 minutes of being out there. But other things I've gotten into don't make me laugh so much at all. One night, I was on break from my cantina shift, so I walked down to this corner store to pick up some Coke and maybe some cigarettes. Then instead of walking straight back to the cantina, I leaned up against a wall outside of the store, then lit up a smoke while I drank my Coke. I was just minding my own business, lost in my thoughts, when I suddenly heard a voice saying, "You work too hard, son." He said it in Spanish, but he had this fatherly tone about him, and when I looked around, I saw this older vaquero-looking guy walking up to me. I say vaquero, like a cowboy, but he dressed rich. Nice boots, nice hat, big shiny belt buckle, you know the kind. I told him something like, "Just trying to get by, Tio," thinking that he was going to move on after a passing comment, but he didn't. He walks right up to me and says, in Spanish, "It's not like everybody used to walk their dogs with sausages, right?" I think even some Chapinas won't understand what this means, so let me explain. In Guatemala, we say something which basically means when times were better and people were richer. Prosperous people can afford to feed their dogs delicious meat like chorizo or longanizas, so it's a saying which refers to that kind of period. The thing is, it's a very Guatemalan phrase, and the guy's accent was very obviously Mexicano, so you can imagine my confusion. I asked him, "Tu es Chapin?" and Chapin being slang for Guatemalan people, but he just laughed, shook his head, and told me, "I've been all over." That made sense, but what didn't was how he knew I was from Guatemala. I asked him how he knew where I was from, and he told me that it was his job to know things about people. According to him, this job paid very well, and if I was willing to give something up, I could make a lot of money too. Now, right away, I recognized that same slimy tone of someone who wants me to do something illegal for them, so I was gearing up to tell him thanks, but no thanks. But he must have read it in my body language or something, because he started trying to reassure me. He told me yes, what he was proposing was illegal, but that it wasn't immoral. I wasn't going to be driving addictive poison across the border or helping young women get into dangerous, life-destroying situations. It was nothing that was going to get me deported. I wouldn't be able to work for at least 6 to 8 weeks after whatever it was that he was proposing, but all my expenses would be paid for during this period, and I'd walk away with $4,000 cash. $4,000 was more than half my salary at that time, and way more than any of the pimps or dealers were offering. Then, with the promise of the work not being immoral, I'll admit that he had my attention. He went on to explain that in the United States, the trick to making money outside of the law was to stay away from vice, and in drugs and prostitution to work with the gringos, not without them or against them, and the wealthier those gringos were, the better. I figured that he was talking about some kind of financial crime, as he kept insisting that no one got hurt and that he worked with the best people around, his words. I guess that he kept me in the dark to keep me curious, something he'd practiced many times over, probably, but it worked. And in the end, I asked him what I had to do to get my hands on that kind of money for just a few weeks' work. But then, instead of telling me straight up, the rich vaquero launched into a whole bunch of questions about my health. He asked me if I have diabetes, any heart problems, if I'm on medication, all this medical-related stuff that didn't really make sense to me at first. I figured whatever it was, I had to be fit and healthy for it, and my God, was I right about that. I wasn't being offered $4,000 for my labor. I was being offered it in exchange for one of my kidneys. And when he first said it, I thought that I must have misheard him, or that he was using some kind of slang term that I wasn't familiar with. He mistook my confusion for shock, and once again he went into this what sounded like a well-rehearsed method of trying to convince me. He told me that a fit young man like me could survive on one kidney, and that with enough time, it might even grow back. I might have been young, broke, and fairly naive, but I wasn't stupid. I knew major organs didn't just grow back. At least I was pretty sure they didn't. I wanted to tell the guy to stick his offer where the sun don't shine, as it was just about the most insane thing that I'd ever heard. But something told me that being rude to such a man wouldn't be a very wise move at all. I told him I'd think about it, and he gave me a card with nothing but a phone number written on it. I didn't call the number, and I knew better than to go saying anything about it because I'm from a place where people talk themselves into their graves sometimes. But I'm also from a place where people cash money into the graves too. So I kept my mouth shut and told myself that with hard work, prosperity would come eventually. Quick fixes are a rare thing in life, and you never fix long-term problems with short-term solutions. I never heard about anyone accepting any offers to sell their organs, but if a man felt comfortable and confident enough to approach migrant workers in the street, there must have been someone out there accepting these offers. I understand the wall of silence involved in something like organ trafficking, but you'd think you'd meet one or two people who actually did it, right? But I never did, and I think I figured out why. Say you went off with a stranger, and they took you to some back alley doctor, and they gas you out under the impression that you're only losing one of your 2 kidneys. Who's to stop them from taking more, or from taking everything? You'd have to be crazy to agree to something like that. Crazy or truly desperate, and that's what scares me. I know that there are people out there so desperate they'll sell their organs. I was almost one of those people myself. I love this country, and I love the people more. But for many migrants like me, the road is long, hard, and some people never make it to the end. I worked as a correctional officer for 2 years, 3 months, and 18 days, because 2 years, 3 months, and 18 days was all I had in me. After that, $1 million wouldn't get me through the doors of that county jail, and $1 billion would only have me working the weekends. My jail wasn't even all that hardcore. There were plenty of other jails up and down California that had way worse reputations than we did, but still, working those night shifts could be like a horror movie sometimes. Inmates loved throwing their own urine and feces at us and other inmates. Lots of inmates getting jiggy with each other, sometimes staff too. Basically all the crazy stuff that you see on TV, most of it is either based on reality or very representative of the kind of stuff inmates get up to. But even so, there's only so long before some of the more common stuff becomes totally routine, and then only the really wilder stuff sticks out. First thing that comes to mind is when I found an inmate trying to catch fire to her clothes with a lighter that she'd smuggled in her you-know-what. I have no idea why she was trying to burn herself like that, but she cried when I caught her, not because she was thankful that I stopped her or anything, but because I told her that I'd have to take her lighter away. I told her to throw it under the door, and she did, and then I left her to crying. Then there's the girl that I found half dead because she hung herself with a bedsheet. I was so convinced that she was gone, but another CO rushed in to give her CPR, and she woke up coughing and spitting, and then went on and survived. It was just about the craziest thing I'd ever seen. I swear that she was almost blue, and then the next minute, she was sitting up, drinking water, and thanking us for getting her down. You'd think that she'd be angry that we stopped her, but I guess people just get trapped in the moment, and when they realize what they almost threw away, they're grateful that you helped stop it. Another time, a girl claimed that she was having a heart attack, but none of us believed her since she pulled a very similar trick by pretending to be sick and then attacking us or trying to escape. But then after the shift changed, A newer male CO was on the girl's wing and suddenly starts doubting that she's faking. The idiot opened up her cell door, kneels down next to her, and before he can do anything, she grabs him by the collar, pulls him down, and sinks her teeth into the skin of his cheek. By the time the CERT team got there, our new CO had a chunk missing from his face, and I heard the biter took a hell of a beating before she gave in. She got aggravated assault by a prisoner charges. The male CO needed 12 staples and never came back. Then there was this other inmate, much more aggressive and heavy-set girl, who decided that she wanted to die. She tried jumping off the second story, but a nearby CO sees her doing it and grabs her. But then, instead of trying to shove the CO off before jumping, the heavy girl decides that she's going to take the CO with her. They were both teetering over the railing before this other male guard showed up to pull them both back over, but I heard for a few seconds there, it looked like both the CO and inmate were headed to the hospital that night. That inmate was always trouble, I think because she knew how physically dominating she was. The only issue was, some girls just don't care how big their opponent is. As one girl told me, they make coffins her size too, ma'am. She was used to girls backing down in the real world, but in jail, that's not such a common thing. Same girl ended up getting stabbed in the back of the head by another inmate. Shank penetrated her skull, and she ended up with brain damage. Nothing severe, but she spent a long time in rehab working out some motor issues. But then the thing that made me crack and just completely walk away wasn't anything that any inmate did. It was my own coworkers that pushed me over the edge. We had this one female guard. I swear that she got her job under the table or something, but she was the worst. Everyone dreaded working with her because they knew they'd be working double to make up for her laziness and incompetence. Word was that she was getting canned next time she messed up, but then when she did mess up, it was in a way bigger than anyone could have expected. She skipped a bunch of walkarounds, and then when she finally got off her butt to do one, she found a male inmate hanging in a cell. But unlike when I found the girl hanging, there was no bringing this guy back. People said that he had been dead for hours, and this is when we were supposed to do walkarounds every half hour or so. We thought the jail was going to throw her under the bus, but then this is why I think she was connected. The jail tried to sweep it all under the rug, like an actual cover-up. We think someone faked paperwork to cover her butt, and she ended up getting pushed and not shoved out, meaning she got a chance to resign without being in disgrace. I've worked for loads of different builders firms over the years, and at one point, I was working as what was basically a supervisor for a small but very successful local firm. It was a hard graft, and the boss could be a proper wanker sometimes, but the pay was out of this world. We'd contract these killer jobs, but because no one else wanted them or could get them done on time, the firm could basically name their price. Pay varied from job to job, and some seemed less worth it than others, but it was way more than I'd be getting from other firms in the area, so I was pretty chuffed about that. The only problem was, it wasn't the most stable of jobs, because if there was nothing available, we didn't work. Until one day, our problems were solved. There was some housing development being laid out, about halfway between us and the next big town over. The local council had already hired a national firm to do the job, but apparently there was some miscommunication about the projected finish date, and the big firm pulls out. This left the council completely in the lurch, as they had already signed the contract on the demolition of some older housing estate. Basically, if the blocks didn't get built, a load of people were going to be homeless come the autumn. And that's where we stepped in. According to the head of the firm, we could get the job done under budget and ahead of schedule, and our secret weapon was night shifts. If the shifts were staggered between all the lads that work there, we could have one group work the day, one group work the night, and get the whole job done in a few months. All we had to do was throw down the foundations and brickwork, and then another firm was coming in for the decorating, so they all needed to be done by a set date. You get the idea anyway. So we start the job, and we're all just doing a week of days followed by a week of nights, and then alternating with the other half of the firm. The days were all right, but the nights got very difficult very quickly. As anyone who's done any serious night shifts will tell you, your daytime life doesn't stop. Those with kids had to go get them to school and back, or there'd be doctor's appointments or other things like that to get done. A group might start a week of nights all chipper and up for it, but by the time Saturday morning came around, we were just about ready to drop dead. This got worse and worse over the weeks and months, with everyone complaining about being overtired, but we also didn't want to throw in the towel and risk breaking the deadline, which in turn would have put the whole contract at risk. Lads were joking about some kind of accident happening, but we all kept our heads screwed on, kept ourselves from cutting corners, and otherwise kept ourselves safe on the job. But that couldn't be said for everyone on the site, and in the end, I suppose it was a case of the inevitable finally happening. We've had this massive 500-ton mobile crane on site for a few nights. Brand spanking new on lease it was, and operating it was one experienced bloke and one apprentice. One night, the crane was in use shifting some steel panels around when, for some reason, the apprentice decides to get one of his later jobs done earlier. He probably thought that he was in a safe spot considering the crane was operating on the opposite side of him, and he also probably thought that he could get a later finish by cleaning the decking off before he usually did. Either way, he made a massive error of judgment. He just didn't realize it until it was way too late. He didn't think that he was in what you might call the crane's swinging area, but was. That's not to say that there isn't a safe spot, he just wasn't in it. And then suddenly, the precast blokes needed a box of plates from another area of the site. The crane turns the other way, and that was that. All I heard was a load of shouting at first, really frantic, frightened-sounding shouts too, so I knew immediately that something was badly wrong. I run over to find the apprentice had gotten trapped between the crane's massive counterweights and the deck that he was cleaning. It crushed him so badly that his body just disintegrated when the counterweights were pulled away. I suppose if every bone in your body had been smashed to bits, there's not much left to hold a person together. It was the worst thing I'd ever seen in my life, honestly. It was effing horrible, and I'll never ever forget it. I'm an absolute bastard when it comes to health and safety now, like a bloody drill sergeant. Some of the younger lads think that I'm just a prick, but I'd rather be a prick whose apprentices got to go home to his mum and dad than a nice bloke at their bloody funerals. The whole aftermath was grim as well. The family of the lad tried to take the firm to court, trying to get a load of money out of them, but the firm was quite easily able to prove that the lad was doing something that he knew he shouldn't have been doing. You gotta sign all kinds of paperwork saying that you've understood what you've been told in terms of workplace safety, so if you breach any of it and get hurt in the process, you haven't got a legal leg to stand on, basically. It was just heartbreaking for the family, to be honest. I don't even think that they were in it for the money. They just needed someone to blame. When you're in that period of mourning, you don't want to accept that it was your loved one's own fault that they lost their life. It's just too soon to have that in your head. But then the head of that firm lost a lot of sleep over it, actually thinking to himself, could I have stopped that in any way? Either through more H&S training or by holding the apprentices to a higher standard before taking them on. It was horrible for everyone involved, but especially for the family and especially for the lads who had to see what was left of the poor guy after the accident. They had their fair share of sleepless nights too, as obviously, so did I. Former hospice nurse here who spent the better part of 3 years working night shifts, so I got a couple of horrible ones to share with you. The first involves massive pulmonary bleeding. This guy had a tumor in his lungs and it kept growing until it basically popped an artery. I personally just put the guy to bed and had been out of the room for no more than 5 minutes when I heard his wife scream after something wet sounding hit the floor. I ran back in to the sight of so much blood pouring out of this guy's mouth. I sent his wife out of the room under the pretense of cleaning it up, but I knew that he only had a few minutes left. I grabbed his hand and told him everything would be over soon. He tried to speak, but nothing but a few weak gurgles came out. It's horrible to see someone so afraid, especially when there's nothing you can do for them. He was begging me to help him breathe again, but unless someone is on the operating table, there's just nothing you can do for them except comfort them as they pass. He went into shock after a minute or two, then eventually died 10 minutes later. I remember how the floor around him was this deep, sticky red from all the congealed blood, and how it took 2 hot washes to get all the stains out of my uniform. I've seen similar in a patient who suffered a sudden rupture of extreme esophageal varices. For people who don't know what that is, you have blood vessels in and around and throughout your esophagus, as is the case for most of the body. In patients with liver disease or liver failure, the liver's inability to do liver stuff caused a huge amount of pressure to build up. This increased pressure in the liver's blood supply causing the backup of blood to be pushed into vessels connected to the liver, and these inflamed blood vessels are called esophageal varices. Think hemorrhoids of the gullet. They can vary in severity, and most often they are undetectable until an ultrasound confirms or if bleeding happens. There are medications that calm the vessels somewhat, but it's a chronic problem that can't be reversed and it only worsens. To put it as plainly as possible, you have these ticking time bombs throughout your whole upper body, and sooner or later, one of them's going to explode. I had another patient, a 32-year-old alcoholic that was going through chronic organ failure and just couldn't seem to fight his way out. He tried rehab before. I had been a candidate for a liver transplant at one point, but there's a threshold. If a person is so sick that they die regardless of a transplant, a doctor isn't going to waste the surgery, so, in essence, the guy drank himself out of transplant candidacy and into an early grave. He was admitted to the hospital because he needed a tap to drain the liters of fluid that built up in his abdomen due to the liver failure, but the buildup of toxins was also causing heart failure and severe respiratory problems. During this hospitalization, he made the decision to go DNR, or DNI, at 32 years old, which means do not resuscitate. We thought that was going to be the end of him, but miraculously, he made a kind of recovery and worked his way up to being able to waddle around the ward. He was discharged, promising to clean himself up, but was admitted to the emergency department a few weeks later with controlled vomiting. He'd fallen off the wagon, gone on a binge, and it straight up killed him. Shortly after arriving on our unit, and despite giving him a bunch of anti-nausea medications, his vomit went from bile appearing to straight blood. I've never seen so much blood coming from a person, and in such a violent, painful, messy way. We tried to replace all the blood that he was losing, in the hopes that the varices would stop bleeding, but they didn't, and although we worked our butts off trying to keep him alive, he began to lose consciousness and his breathing slowed. An irregular heartbeat quickly turned into prolonged ventricular tachycardia, which is when the lower chambers of the heart beat very fast in quick succession, which is obviously something you don't want. Normally, we'd be considering defibrillation by that point, but because he'd opted for a DNR, we just had to step back and let it happen. His heart rhythm quickly deteriorated further into a slow, very abnormal rate and rhythm, and then started to fail completely. The little blips on the monitor were rare at this point, and his breathing had gone from gasping a few times each minute to nothing at all. I've been in situations like that where staff are devastated to have failed to save someone's life. Sometimes it seems like someone's about to pull through and then they're just gone, and the doctor is calling it. But that time was the first time when instead of the sense of loss and frustration that everyone just has to swallow so they can carry on, there was a sense of relief. This almost indescribable sense of relief throughout the room because he was no longer suffering anymore. To this day, what happened in that room remains the most harrowing example of what addiction can do, and the outcome was the most hideously miserable but preventable death I've ever witnessed. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams the nights before every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And be sure to say congrats to Hannah and Ryan.